But there's a lot of different ways, a lot of different things to look at and consider when we're talking about foliar feeding, because we want to use high quality raw material products that lead to high quality finished products that are going to provide the best response when we're looking at both a starter fertilizer application and then coming back and utilizing that same fertilizer in a foliar application. And not all fertilizers are really and truly designed for foliar applications. Some may be designed for more of a band application. Some might be designed for more of a broadcast application. As Isaiah said, dry fertilizers, not going to be a good choice for a foliar application because most of that's going to end up on the soil and wait for the roots to take it up. Whereas with a liquid product, you've got it on the leaf. And if you've got the rest of the things correct, you can have that uptake and see some very significant responses very early. However, if we're using the wrong fertilizer, a fertilizer that was developed for a different purpose, we can have other issues that come along with that. We can have some challenges like phytotoxicity or the burning of the leaves and the stems. And that's something that we want to make certain doesn't happen. You know, we've talked about a variety of subjects over these past 5 weeks or 10 weeks, past 5 telephone calls in regard to what can we keep and how can we keep your plants from having a bad day. Foliar feeding can help your plants from having a bad day. They can also create a bad day if we do things wrong. So we need to make certain that we're doing things right, getting the right nutrients out there at the right time, at the right rate, and kind of goes back to the 4 R's. The right time, the right rate, the right source, and the right placement. Well, in this instance, our placement is foliar feeding. But now we have to figure out what are the other 3 R's. And some of that comes into play with what type of crop are we dealing with? Are we dealing with a high end demand crop or a low end demand crop? You know, that's going to be used to determine, do we look at using our Feast 918-9 versus our Feast 318-18? Or maybe we've got some crops that have other needs, and such as alfalfa, where I might think of using or including the Feast Sidekick, the 002517S, into that application. Maybe we're looking at a late season application and look at using our Feast XL, the 2600 with 0.5% boron. And looking at the nutrient, specifically the micronutrient demands of the different crops. You know, it could be, as Isaiah talked about, you know, and as I had a couple of conference calls, or not conference calls, but had a couple of calls today talking about Feast boron and what are some application options and ways of doing that. You know, boron is something that is needed both early and right near pollination. So we can put them on in a early application and a sideband application, and then come back and supply additional levels, additional needs through a foliar application. So as I was mentioning, if we're talking about crops like corn, cotton, wheat, I would consider using more the Feast 918-9, maybe 1 to 3 gallons of Feast 918-9, or depending upon what other nutrient needs are there, maybe we use the Feast 318-18, add a little bit of Feast XL to that to add a little bit more nitrogen, depending upon what that crop is needing. So we've got a lot of flexibility to mix and match and put things together to come up with the right Feast fertilizers for that specific application. While if we're talking about soybeans or alfalfa, as I was mentioning earlier, I would look more at using like the Feast 215-19 or 318-18 with those 2 crops. And then especially with alfalfa, because it is such a consumer of potassium, I would look at adding some of the Feast Sidekick, the 0025-17S, into that solution and mixture to make certain that we are supplying additional levels, because it does consume so much potassium. And the sulfur just works so well with the nitrogen and works so well and helps out as well. And as Isaiah talked about, crop staging is very important. You know, we have to get the fertilizers out there at the right time, you know, and look at the right time is not only the right growth stage, but also the right time of day. So when we consider the growth stage, looking at the corn and soybeans for the early growth stages, typically we're looking at V3 to V5. And on corn, V3 is when that girth of the ear is being determined, and V8 to V12 is when the length of the ear is being determined. So that's why we want to get out there and do that foliar feeding at that time period on corn, so that we can stimulate that plant to go out and forage for more nutrients, take up that early fertility program that has been applied, or encourage it to go out and forage for that side dress fertility that has been applied. And then we can come back and on soybeans, again, there we're looking at an early season application at V3 to V5. And judging by our call, it doesn't look like we have many folks that may be growing cotton, because from what I can see, most of our people on the call are from the Midwest, Nebraska, Minnesota, all the way out to Pennsylvania. I do see that we do have an individual or two from North Carolina. So with the cotton, typically we're looking at getting that applied in a foliar application at pinhead square. And so we've got to make certain that we do have those growth stages right. And if we miss that growth stage, can we go out and make that application? Well, you can, but it's not going to be advisable, because you're not going to see the response that you're looking for and that you're wanting to obtain. And so we need to make certain that we are comfortable, we are knowledgeable about identifying what the growth stage is that we're looking for. For corn on V3 to V5, we're looking at leaf collars. So when you've got 3 leaf collars on that plant, you're at V3. When you've got 5 leaf collars on that plant, you're at V5. On soybeans, for example, there, if you've got 3 fully unfolded trifoliates, you're at V3. If you've got 2 fully unfolded trifoliates, but the third one just hasn't quite completely unfolded yet, you're still at V2, so you're still a little early. And the same would go for V5. You'd want to wait until you have 5 fully unfolded trifoliates to make certain that we do have that timing and that application at the right growth stage. And when we look at growth stages, as Isaiah was talking about, corn needs a lot of nitrogen at and after pollination. And so we want to make certain that we're getting the nutrients out there at the time they need them for the peak reproductive stages and the peak growth stages, so that those plants are not having a good day, as mentioned earlier, and that they are producing as well as we can expect them to, as we want them to. And to me, tissue testing falls right in with this, and it's vastly different than soil testing. You know, soil testing lets us know what nutrients are there, what nutrients we need to use and apply to reach our yield goal. Tissue testing provides us with a snapshot of what is happening at the time that sample is taken. We may have applied all the right nutrients that we needed, but maybe 2 or 3 of those nutrients aren't being taken up by the plant because they were tied up, like Isaiah mentioned, and unavailable to the plant. And so that tissue testing can identify that hidden hunger so that you can address some of those specific needs to keep your crop and your plants from having a bad day. But it also lets you know how the plants are doing it, taking up your soil fertility program so that you can refine your soil fertility program, make certain that it is being utilized, make certain that we are addressing any of those nutrient needs that are coming up during the season. It can also let you know of any specific treatment issues that need to be addressed during that growing season. One thing that it does not do is tissue testing does not let you know how much nutrients are needed for the remainder of the year. So soil testing and tissue testing each have their place. They're definitely not one replaces the other, just like a starter fertilizer is not replaceable by a foliar fertilizer. Because with the starter fertilizer going in or near the seed furrow, it's going to be available for immediate uptake to provide an excellent start for that crop. Whereas tissue testing and foliar feeding is designed to stimulate that plant to go out and take up those nutrients that have been applied early. And you can get a custom application, custom recommendation from our AgroVantage tissue testing and the AgroVantage system. And if we don't have that, the Kip Colors Nutrient Compass foliar fertilizer is a good alternative if you're not testing and you want to cover all the bases to stimulate that plant, because it's got NPK, it's got a variety of the micronutrients in it. It does have some moly in it that is unique to the Kip Colors Nutrient Compass foliar fertilizer product, because the other Feast fertilizer products do not contain moly. So if that's something that you're looking to, that can provide some excellent benefits. And it also provides a lot of opportunity to utilize it with other applications and other chemicals that you may be applying. And so we've discussed some, Isaiah, on, different fertilizers and the selection of those for foliar feeding. But we also have some other products in the AgroVantage line that are commonly used in foliar feeding applications and aren't necessarily classified as fertilizers. And would you like to touch on that, or anything you would like to add to what was just recently covered?
No, I definitely just want to agree with you there that, tissue testing does not replace soil testing. Like you were saying, we can't really quantify how much we need from a tissue test. It might tell us based on the ratios of those nutrients in the plant tissue, whether we're high in nitrogen, whether we're low in nitrogen, phosphorus, and the micronutrients, but it's not going to tell you, it's not going to spit out a reading like our soil test does, where it'll say you need, 100 pounds of phosphorus and this many pounds of potassium to meet your yield goal. That's something I really want to push home, that with these tissue tests, we're really not even looking at a yield goal. We're really just looking at the snapshot, the levels of the nutrients in that tissue. Like you were saying, Dan, how it's responding to the soil, how it's taking up those nutrients. Because as we know, things like calcium and magnesium, you could have fairly high levels in the soil, but if you've got a low pH, those are basically going to be tied up. They're not going to be available for crop uptake. So even though a soil test is going to indicate that we have plenty to meet our yield goal, based on that pH, an uptake issue is likely going to be coming down the road. And that's where a tissue test can really get those in-season diagnosis going on. It's a lot more effective than just scouting, a lot more effective than just, as we kind of covered, looking at the individual crop demands and focusing on those. For instance, applying extra manganese if we're spraying glyphosate, maybe boron with glyphosate.